Hello, everybody. It's Phil Jacobus. It's September 29th. I'm in my office in New York City. Thank you for joining me. Today, I am joined by Harry Glorikian. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. Uh, but I will tell you that however you properly pronounce his name, he is one interesting fellow. And he's going to talk a little bit about the evolution of technology in medicine from a different angle from some of the discussions we've had in the past. So in a minute, we'll be joined by Harry, but before we do, let's take a look at some of the stories that are occurring in our news today. One interesting story, some of you may have been tracking the Illinois hospital that's where some of the nurses are on strike. It looks like they've reached a tentative agreement. Another reprint from our magazine is a story on radio frequency shielding for the MRI suite. You know, this is something that we do every so often. There's a little new information in there, and I encourage you to take a look at that if you can. We talk about the cyber attack at UHS. I guess they have something like 400 hospitals in the United States and in the UK, but fortunately no patient information was compromised. So these are just some of the stories that are in our news today. I encourage you, as always, to sign up for our online news. It's free. We cover hot topics every day, and we reprint some of our more in-depth pieces from our monthly magazine. Hello, everyone. I'm so lucky today to be joined by Mr. Harry Glorikian, who's located in Boston. Harry, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You know, Harry is the author of Moneyball Medicine, a very interesting fellow who has been sometimes called a technology evangelist. So Harry, for those of our readers who may not, and viewers who may not be familiar with your background, tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Well, I, graduated with a degree in biology, ended up going into pathology a long time ago and working in an area called immunohistochemistry, which was sort of the first tip into what we now call precision medicine, using a biomarker to identify how you should treat someone or whether someone will react to a therapy or not. Then I went on to a company called Applied Biosystems, which I was very lucky, was embarking on doing the human genome and creating the instrumentation to be able to do it. And after that, I ran a strategy consulting firm that I grew and then sold to a private equity fund. And now I'm in the world of venture capital. And in my spare time, I have written a couple of books, one in diagnostics, one that you mentioned called Moneyball Medicine, which is about how data will change the practice of medicine. And I also publish record a podcast called Moneyball Medicine on the same subject about how data, AI, machine learning, and these things is going to change the practice of medicine.
Okay, tell us about Moneyball Medicine. What sort of topics did you cover there?
The thrust of the book was, mainly to people in the healthcare industry, which was, how is data going to change your world, right? We've seen how data has changed publishing, how data has changed, radio and television. Every industry is being affected by data. And since the Reinvestment and Recovery Act got put into play, we've seen EMRs come online, which is opened up to the dawn of the digitization of healthcare. And once you digitize something, the ability to manipulate it is significant. You may not have to do the same thing you do at the location you do it at. Sensor technology allows you to monitor a patient remotely. High-speed data systems allow you to look at images remotely. AI systems and machine learning systems can now learn from those images and highlight things that a human may miss, or do it much faster, or reorder the slides and say, you want to look at this one first because it looks like there's a problem. So you can see a dramatic impact of data, sensors, and technology on how healthcare is being practiced. And you can see CVS and Walmart, Amazon, making bolder and bolder moves all the time because technology extends their ability to reach directly through to patients.
You know, you mentioned some examples of how data is used in healthcare. And tell me in your mind, what are the parallels between data and precision medicine? How do they intersect?
So, well, without data, we can't make a better diagnostic decision. I mean, diagnostics accounts for probably 80+% of all decisions that a physician might make based on some level of data, except if you look at some of the blood work and so forth, those are typically gross diagnostics. They give you a general idea of what's happening. But if you do sort of sequencing on a tumor, you might be able to find very specific gene sequences associated with a particular therapy that would give you a higher level of efficacy with that patient. And that statement stands for any condition. I mean, I remember when I had an app on my watch called Cardiogram, and I said, I haven't opened it for a while. I opened it up, and it monitors my heartbeat off my Apple Watch. And it said, hi, Mr. Glorikian, have you ever been diagnosed with sleep apnea? And I said, yes. And it said, are you being treated for sleep apnea? And I said, yes. And it said, thank you so much for contributing to our research. But essentially what it found out was from a single biomarker being my heartbeat, that it said, this guy, there's something wrong, and he might have sleep apnea. And if I said, I'm not being treated for it, I bet you, I wish I could go back and try it, I bet you it would have said, you may want to go have that checked out. And so these silent killers, whether they be blood pressure, an arrhythmia, sleep apnea, prediabetes, sensor technology allows you to maybe highlight these ahead of time, which then goes, and now you can go and have it validated with a healthcare professional.
So that is a great intersection of precision medicine and data analytics. I'm not sure if that's the correct term that you use, but when you look into the future, how do you see things changing? Do you have a section in your book about the future?
Yes, I mean, every chapter sort of talks about places where we're seeing large shifts. The last chapter talks about, starts to give a glimpse into what the future will look like. But you can see how, especially because the payment system is changing. Had the payment system not changed, we wouldn't see a shift in healthcare. I mean, people don't change their habits if you don't change the way they get paid. And so if you look at the Affordable Care Act, and I know that people always grouse about it, and I always ask them, have you read it? Most people haven't read it. So I don't know how you grouse about something that you haven't studied, but it pays on outcomes. And we were talking a little earlier about if you don't measure something, you can't improve it. And so if you're paying on outcomes, you need to measure to be able to improve. And so where do I see this going? I see this because we're moving to healthy care as opposed to sick care.
Right.
Healthy care requires monitoring. Your car, the little light goes on and says, you want to go have this checked before it breaks. So you go have it checked and you fix it before it breaks. So sensor technology can tell you something's not right physiologically. And if you take maybe 3 or 4 different sensors, you might be able to narrow down the problem to a particular area that would then let you get ahead of it. Telemedicine allows me to see into someone's home, see their living conditions. With certain sensor technology plus telemedicine, does the doctor need to be with the patient at every visit? Maybe it's not every visit, but it can be spread out. So you can see how technology will completely change potentially where medicine is practiced.
And we see that, I suppose you would agree that what's happening with COVID has accelerated that process.
So COVID has actually brought, I think, brought things forward 5 to 10 years.
Yes.
Because you can't have change in healthcare if you don't change the regulatory and the reimbursement system, because those will always hold back any advancement.
And COVID has forced that change, like it or not.
Correct. Dramatically in some cases. If you look at how quickly we've gone from not knowing COVID to sequencing it to coming up with the first therapeutic targets to being able to potentially approve a vaccine, I think we're going to set a record
Yes.
for how quickly that happened.
But also we have more people utilizing remote consultation that they didn't do in the past.
Correct. So the way I got paid was I saw you. So I could log that and I got paid. So seeing you over the phone, not ideal. Change the situation. I have no way to see you because everything's shut down, but I need to see you because my revenue stream, everybody's got to change the system, and now we reimburse to allow for telemedicine to take place. I think we're in an evolutionary stage of that, because I can use FaceTime, I can use these other unsecure platforms. At some point, you're going to want to have a patient on a secure platform, want to have their record right in front of you, and you're going to want an AI system on top of that data, highlighting to you what you need to know about that patient so you can focus in.
Now, what barriers are there to greater adoption of this sort of technology in medicine or technology in healthcare?
So cost is always an issue. We've got to bring down the cost of some of these technologies to make it widely available to a broader swath of people. You know, now somebody that can afford an Apple Watch will get an Apple Watch, but you need to bring down the cost so it's much more widely available to certain people. And maybe it's not the Apple Watch, maybe there will be a lot of other instruments that are out there that are lower cost but do very specific functions. You need to have the healthcare system embrace this to encourage people to sort of go down this road, because if I'm taking your heartbeat all the time, I can notice an anomaly. I can notice something is wrong because I've got a million heartbeats. And I notice so it's like when you take your car and you say, yeah, it's making that noise. Of course, when you take it in, it's not making the noise, right? Whereas, but if there's a sensor technology in there, you bring up the data, you look at it and say, oh, there's the problem. And you can get to it much easier. I always show my doctor my longitudinal data. And he's like, oh, your blood pressure has been great. It's not one blood pressure measurement, it's over months. So
Yes.
he can see any outliers. I look at my weight scale, and when my weight is going in the wrong direction, I'm like, I need to change my diet and try to turn it back down in this direction.
Right. What about the whole idea of privacy? Will privacy play a role in technology and medicine, do you think?
Very much so. I think privacy, working on security and privacy in the area of healthcare is another huge area of opportunity of investment. Healthcare is not as good at security and privacy as it could or should be. And it needs to step that game up a few levels. There is a way to share information and be secure. If you think about, financial transactions, I can get money, and when I travel to Singapore or anywhere else, I can't get my health records if I go next door. That's a problem.
Yes. Yes, that is, and it's more of a problem as people spend summertime in the Northeast and wintertime in the South.
And the funny thing is the system itself is holding it back because of competition, and because the systems that exist are fairly old, antiquated, and arcane, right? They were written for, EMRs were accounting systems, not patient management systems. So ideally, you'd want to write them from the ground up for where we are today. I believe the greatest shift is going to come from outside, from an Apple or somebody else, allowing you to transfer information easier rather than dependent on the status quo to make the change to allow people to, have that capability.
Will healthcare providers resist sharing data with other healthcare providers, do you think?
I think that needs to be put in the power of that needs to be put into the hands of the patient, which again, the Affordable Care Act actually has,
Right.
language in there that gives the patient the right to their data, and therefore they should be able to share it. If you look at, different healthcare systems, like I forgot the name of the one that's in New York. They're the largest healthcare provider in New York that basically said, we're going to write our own EMR from the ground up, which would give us more control over patient data, managing patients, and then hopefully the patients being able to share that data.
Okay, well, what did we leave out? Anything?
Well, we could talk about this for hours. There's, every facet of the system is being pressured to shift in a certain way. And I think, hospital systems and so forth need to be investing on this cutting edge, if nothing else, to learn how this is changing. But they also need to put some of these things in place. In other words, those systems that had been playing with telemedicine, when COVID hit, they were able to just ramp up very quickly because they had the experience. Those that had not at all suffered dramatically. Hospital systems need to look at self-insuring or providing their own insurance. All the ones that had their own insurance still had revenue coming in and were able to manage their patients accordingly. Those that had third-party insurance, they took the biggest hit on their bottom line because there's no other revenue coming in other than procedural. So technology, understanding your patients, understanding how to manage them, giving them the services they need. I think this is all technology can enable that to happen easier and faster. It's just embracing it and understanding it and picking the right ones, I think, are going to make the biggest difference to the systems.
Well, Harry, you're a very interesting person. I'm so glad that you were able to join us today. You talked about, you shared a lot of information with us. In some ways, it's like being reminded to floss, in a way, common sense, but people still haven't embraced it to the extent that they might. So let's hope that they do in the future. I look forward to reading your book, and I want to thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.